Hello, my name is Safradio Salmon Mwijage from Edukea Tanzania. Welcome in this session to proceed with our topic in history from 4, which is changes in the political, social and economic policies in Africa after independence. So as I told you that our topic concerning with 3 areas. We have already seen political changes, economic changes, so now we are going to finish up with social changes. So changes that done were based on 4 areas, which were, it means the social changes which were done based on 4 areas, and those were in education, water supply, health service and housing. It means that the social services or social changes that were introduced by the African states after independence based on 4 areas: education, water supply, health service and housing. So we are going to see one area after another. The first one, it is education after independence. It means education that was provided after independence are the following objectives. It means that the education service that was provided in African states after independence had the following objectives. The first objective was to promote self-reliance, social justice, national unity, economic development, equity and scientific literacy. It means to promote self-reliance. It means the education of African states after independence was aimed at to prepare the young people or the youth to depend on themselves, without depending on other assistance. So they prepared the young people to be self-reliant, and they will able to produce on themselves, without depending on others. So this was the first objective. But another was social justice. We are still under the first point, social justice. It means that the aim of education or objective of education was to provide social justice among the people. It means that the aim was to provide the people education about their social justice which they have. It means the rights which they have in society. So for example, the right to live, the right to marry, the right to form maybe the social interaction with others. Those was another concept dealing with the first objectives. But another was national unity. It means that the education after independence was provided with the aim of providing the national unity among the people in the nation. It means the citizens were educated or getting education on how to maintain the national unity among the citizens in the country. But another concept was economic development. It means that people were getting education at school in how they will enhance the economic development, specifically in increasing the production, specifically like in agricultural sector. So the schools in that time or after independence were taught on how they will produce in agricultural activities, and every schools by that time had the farm or the school farm, which were the students were cultivating and producing the agricultural products, and that products were enabling those students to get skills and knowledges. After completion of their studies, they will be able to depend on themselves on how to produce foods and cash crops. So that was the aim of education after independence. But another was equity and scientific literacy. It means that they were aimed to get education, to provide education on scientific base. Or it means the education must be provided on practical means the student is getting education by doing the student is learning by doing. So it means the scientific methods were being applied. It means the practical things were being done during the education that were provided after independence in African states. But the second one was to promote cultural values that the colonial education was neglected, or education neglected. It means that to promote cultural values that the colonial education was neglected. It means there are cultural values that were neglected by the colonial education. For example, the education concerning with the traditional and the customs of the Africans were neglected during the colonial education. So some schools or African schools that were established after independence were promoting the cultural values that were being practicing before the coming of colonialism, and that were reintroduced after independence in order to enhance and promote the cultural values that were lost after the coming of colonialists. But another was to eradicate racialism in education sector. It means the aim or another objective was to eradicate racism. It means the provision of education basing on racial or basing on races. It means you can see that the African education were in pyramidal. It was in a pyramid that was, you can see that here there were three areas where here there were European students or European educated people. Here there is Asians, here Africans. So you can see that in the lower education, the Africans were many, but in the middle education level were the Asians, and the upper stage of the education were the Europeans and the sons of chiefs. So you can see that the education were provided according to the race of the people. So the education that was introduced after independence means was to eradicate racism in the provision of education service. But the last one was to eradicate dependence on colonial masters in all spheres. It means that the education which was provided during colonialism was aimed to make the Africans to depend on the colonial administration or colonial supervision. But the education which was established during after independence was aiming to make Africans to be dependent, to be independent on themselves without depending on the colonial masters in the spheres in all spheres like political, social, and economic. It means that in the issue of politics, the Africans must be dependent, must be independent, no depending on foreign assistance or colonial assistance. So even in the economic development of the African states were aimed to be independent and self-dependent. So these were the aim of African education that were provided after independence. After that, let us see the features of education after independence. Education after independence, features of education after independence. The first one was religion organizations and the communities continued to sponsor and to run the schools even after independence. To mean that after African independence or African states to get independence, the religions, organizations, and the communities were the ones that were sponsoring the schools in the African states. And you can see that in many African countries, there are still schools which are sponsoring or sponsored by the religious institutions or religious organizations. Like like in Tanzania, there are schools which were sponsored by the religious institutions, like Lugambwa in Kagera, Lugambwa Secondary School. This was the school which was sponsored by Roman Catholic. But there is another school which is called Ekima. This is Ekima Girls High School. This was Ekima Girls School or Secondary School. That was another school which was sponsored by religious institutions. So you can see that the features of education that was provided by that time or after independence was sponsored by religious organizations and the communities. But another feature was many of Africans emphasized on efforts to acquire academic education as during colonialism. It means that the education that was provided during, after independence, was aimed or make the emphasis on getting the academic education. It means that the education was measured on the academic performance of the students. So that was another feature of education that was provided after independence. But another one, university education was emphasized. It means that after independence, the education which was provided emphasized on getting the university education. It means that in up to 1960, the few people in Africa got the university degree education. It means that the bachelor degree was few. The people who had the bachelor degree in Africa were few, and they were not less than less than 100 people in Africa. So you can see that was the less number of people who had a university education. But when it reached in 1961, the universities were established in different African countries. For example, in Tanganyika or in Tanzania, the University of Dar es Salaam was established to provide the university education level. Even when it reached in 1963, the University of Dar es Salaam and the University of Nairobi was made to form the University of East Africa. So that was the most emphasis on university education. Sorry. University education was emphasized. That was another feature of education that was provided after independence in African states. But another feature was it used the colonial structure of education or colonial syllabus. It means that the education service that provided after independence was much based on the use of colonial structure or colonial syllabus. So it means that the subjects which were taught at the schools mostly based on Western or colonial structure, whereby they taught about about colonialism, the causes of colonialism, the establishment of colonialism, the occurrence of First World War, the occurrence of Second World War, Great Economic Depression, the formation of various political parties, and the other education intents or contents that were based on colonial structure. That's why you see even now the syllabus of many African countries are basing on Western syllabus or Western structure. It means that the syllabus of that guiding the African education systems are basing on the Western structure. So even now the education system, the education service which are provided in many African countries are basing or adopted from the Western structure. But another, or the last one, local staffs as most and the post-secondary teaching staff were trained. It means that the education that were provided after independence, it means that the local staffs are the most important and the post-secondary teaching staffs were trained. It means that to create or to train the personnel who will learn and conduct various activities in the provision of education service in schools. So this was another feature of education that was provided after independence in African states. So after looking at the features, let us jump to the second area on the changes which he made on the social affairs or social changes, which was provision of health services after independence. To me, that the provision of health services after independence, we are going to see, to me, at the following objectives. As the first one was to expand modern health facilities to Africans. It means that the health services that was provided after independence in African state was to expand the modern health facilities in order to ensure there is sufficient and the modern provision of health services to the most Africans, as the long-lasting diseases were facing the African countries. So the main aim was to expand modern health facilities to Africans in order to countercheck the diseases which have been facing the African countries before independence. But another objective was to increase living standards of the people. It means that the main another objective of provision of health services was to increase the living standard of the people. It means that the living standard of the people aimed to be increased, whereby the people will get the good health and it means that the health of the people will be improved through the provision of good health service or better health services to the Africans. So that was another objective. But another one was to reduce and remove the high infant mortality rates and high maternal death rates during delivery. It means that the main aim was to reduce and remove the infant mortality rate and the deaths of women during delivering or during delivering of child delivering. It means that during the conceiving the child, the delivering of the child, the many women or many mothers were lost in their lives, or even childs were lost in their lives because there were no good or better health services that were provided during that process or that action. It means the main objective or another objective was to reduce and remove the high infant mortality rate. It means to reduce the number of deaths of children or infants. It means the young children during the delivering, and the number of mothers who are delivering their child or newborn to be reduced or to be removed through the provision or providing the better health services in the hospitals and the other health centers. But the last one was to remove racial discrimination in provision of health services through promoting health to citizens. It means that another aim of providing health services was to remove racial discrimination. It means that the provision of health services in many African countries was based on racism or based on races, whereby the white people were getting the best health services, and the Arabs or Indians and the Arabs or Asians at all were getting the medium health services, while the Africans were getting the poor health services. So the main aim or the another objective of provision of health services after independence was to remove the racial discrimination in. After looking the objectives of health services that was provided after the independence in African states, let us see the features of health services after independence in Africa. It means the first feature was it accommodated a large number of people in one center. It means that among of the feature of health services that was provided in Africa after independence means that you can find that a large number of people were get the health services in a single or in one center that could not satisfy the provision of services. So you can find that the large number is getting the services or health services in a single or in one health service center. So that was the among of the feature. To mean that there was scarcity of health service centers that you can find it. So another, it featured with provision of free service. It means that another services or another feature of health services that were present after independence, where it featured with provision of health services freely. It means the health services were provided free of charge, as citizens were getting the health services from health centers like hospital, dispensaries and other health centers free without any payments. But the situation changed after the collapse of socialism in 1980. So you can see that many African countries that were adopted socialism, the provision of health service in free or by free that was removed and make the cost sharing or brought the cost sharing, where the citizens or the health service gainers were supposed to pay a little amount of money to get the health service. But another, it featured by flow of aids in health services. It means that even if the colonialists granted the independence to the Africans, they still providing the aids concerning health services, so that the Africans could get or could afford the services which were provided in health services or health centers that were established after and during the independence. So you can see that the Western countries were providing the health service aids or the aids concerning with health service in African countries. But the last one, it mostly emphasized on preventive rather than curative aspect of health services. It means that the health services which was provided after independence, it mostly emphasized on preventive. It means to prevent the disease or to prevent the causes of the disease rather than the curing the disease in providing the health service. So the people or the citizens of the nation or the people who had been affected by those diseases were emphasized on ensuring they prevent on the spread of that disease rather than on curative aspect or rather than on curing that disease. After looking the features of health services after independence in Africa, let us see the strengths of provision of health services in Africa after independence. It means the strengths of provision of health services in Africa after independence. What were the strengths or advantages? The first one was provision of free health service. It means among of the strengths was there was provision of health services freely. It means the services or health services were provided free of charge to every citizen. So this was among the strengths. But the second one was provision of vaccine are enabled to eradicate many epidemic diseases like measles and polio. It means that the vaccination which was provided to the young people or to the young children or the infant after they get birth, that vaccination was that increased to the eradication of many epidemic diseases like the vaccine of polio and the measles. It means that those diseases were affecting or were much affecting the African people before independence. So after the provision of those health services after independence, the vaccine led to the enabling in eradication of many epidemic diseases in African countries like polio and the measles. But another was infant mortality rate was reduced. It means that the infant mortality rate was reduced. The rate of death of infants were reduced because there were constant and sufficient provision of infant health services, whereby they got vaccine to protect them from those epidemic diseases like polio and the measles. So you can see that the infant mortality rate was combated or was reduced, even to be removed. So you can see that was another strength. But another one, the establishment of health and the medical training centers. It means that this was the last strength, but not least. It means there was establishment of health and the medical training centers. Those were centers which were aiming at providing education concerning with medical provision and the health service provision. So these were centers with the professionals or expertise who were professionalized in medical and the health services provision. So these centers ensured or increased the awareness among the people of African countries on how they will handle the epidemic diseases and other problems concerning with health services. So until there, these were about the provision of health services. So I would like to give you an exercise which is is only one question. It means that assess the features of health services in Africa after independence. Means you have to assess yourself what were the features of health services in Africa after independence. Until there, this is the end of our today's lesson. So I welcome you to learn together with us from Edukea Tanzania, and I would like to welcome you in the next session. So thank you for listening me and watching me. I wish you a good time. So that's it. Enjoy. Have a good day. Bye bye.